Welcome to this Community Viz video tutorial. This video tutorial walks through the Scenario 360 TimeScope wizard. Scenario 360 TimeScope is a decision tool that helps you look at changes over time. As I move the TimeScope time on the slider bar, you can see that these buildings appear and disappear according to what year it is. That's because they've all been given a build date based on rules I set up in TimeScope, and they don't appear until the year that they are scheduled to build. The impacts associated with them change over the years as well. TimeScope does not actually create or destroy features. It just uses symbology that prevents features that have not been built yet from appearing on the map. You can see that represented here in the table of contents. The colored dots represent buildings that have been built, and the features listed under Not Yet Built without dots represent buildings that have not yet been built. Let's take a look at how this analysis is set up. At the top of the wizard is the TimeScope time assumption, which you use later to specify the date being seen in the analysis. This assumption applies to all the layers that are using TimeScope. You can edit it like any other assumption using any units such as minutes, days, or years. You can choose to put TimeScope on as many layers as you would like. For example, you might want to include trees and buildings, but for this example, we're going to use this one building layer. Double-click on the layer to set up its TimeScope properties. On the first page of the wizard, you are asked to specify the date range that TimeScope will use for this layer. Usually, the range of these dates is the same or narrower than the range used for the overall TimeScope time assumption. I'm going to choose 2020 to 2040. The next screen specifies the build rate, or the rate at which features are built over time. There are 4 options for rate types: all at once, linear growth, exponential growth, and ask the user. The user-specified option asks the user to provide a build date when a feature is created or edited. It is usually used for analyses where you already know the build dates of your features. I'm going to choose exponential growth. Using this option will make the features in this layer grow at an exponential rate. For rate settings, you can choose to use one rate for all scenarios or use a different rate for every scenario. Note that when using exponential growth, your initial or existing features have to be non-zero so that the percentage growth has something to build off of. I'm going to choose to use one rate for all scenarios. I've chosen 5% growth per year, and I will start with 0 initial features in this layer. By looking over at my attribute table for the layer's existing buildings, I know that I have 767 existing features, which is what I'm going to use to base my 5% growth rate on. The next screen, Build Order, is where you specify the order in which features are built over time. You can learn more about the order types in the help, but I will go over a few here. Phase attribute is a popular choice. It builds features based on an existing attribute in the TimeScope layer, buildings in my case. Features with the lowest values in the phase attribute are built first and higher numbers are built last. If you've already won the suitability wizard and checked the TimeScope box there, you can choose phase attribute here and point to the TimeScope attribute it creates for you. That way the most desirable features are built first. Phase layer is similar to phase attribute, but it uses values from another layer instead of an attribute in your current layer. If you need a more complex model, you can use the custom setting, which allows you to use your own models for determining build order. I'm going to use proximity to a layer and choose existing buildings as my proximity layer. This means that the first buildings to be built will be the ones closest to the already existing buildings. Once you've set up build rate and build order, most of the work is done. From here, you're just setting up output options. The next screen, TimeScope feature counting, allows you to choose to calculate the total number of features built at different times and store these results in a set of indicators or in a table. I'm going to accept the defaults, which will store the results in a set of indicators and create a chart. If we close the wizard and take a look at the chart that I created earlier, you can see that each point on the chart is one of the indicators. Back in the wizard, if you had a lot of years or indicators, you could consider using the table. On the last screen, you can usually accept the defaults. You almost always want to change the symbology. Remember how I said that TimeScope doesn't actually create or destroy features, it just uses symbology? Changing the symbology will make features invisible if they haven't been built. You can choose to generate a TimeScope animation for this layer, which I will do to demonstrate what it does. Click Finish. Now that the wizard has run, I'm going to take a look at what it created. I right-click on my Buildings layer to open its attribute table. Scrolling over, you can see 3 new columns, TS Build Date, TS Built, and TS Order. TS stands for TimeScope. TS Build Date indicates when the feature is to be built, and TS Built has a value of 1 if the feature is built and a value of 0 if it has not been built. This value updates when you change the TimeScope time assumption. TS Order is always created but oftentimes shows up as null. It is used when you create your own custom models for build order. Now let's take a look at our charts. We already looked at the TimeScope Built Buildings chart, but you will notice below that we have a lot of common impact calculation charts. If I change the year using the TimeScope time assumption, these common impact charts will update. That's because common impacts is only showing impacts from buildings that have been built. The Common Impacts wizard automatically detects TimeScope attributes, so if you're going to run Common Impacts, make sure to run TimeScope first. You can also use the TS Built values when creating your own impact indicator formulas. Just add a where condition in the formula that is linked to the attribute value TS Built equals 1. Last, let's quickly watch the TimeScope animation that we set up in the wizard. To run this, first make sure that your TimeScope time assumption is set as far out into the future as it goes. Then press this icon here, and then press play. You can watch as TimeScope builds all of the futures from the beginning to the end of the TimeScope time. This has been a short tutorial of the Scenario 360 TimeScope wizard and its capabilities. For more community viz resources and video tutorials, please visit our website.